Hello, friends. We are living in a time of war. In fact, we are now in the crescendo of the war. Events in Ukraine and Russia could lead possibly to World War III. There's not only a threat of war, this deep, dark evil of Nazism is being exposed. It has been hidden in plain sight in the modern day, yet no one has truly paid attention to it at large until now. You see, there's a hidden, undeclared war, a genocide by Ukrainian neo-Nazis against their own people. The Lord is draining the swamp in America, in Europe, and in the world. I believe that the Lord is using President Putin to expose a corrupt trail of Nazis and the globalist agenda. It is so elaborate that it has much of the world fooled. TikTok stars are now being enlisted by the White House and briefed about the war in Ukraine. The trend today is to virtue signal, to jump on the latest narrative that the media is spouting, and it's all in an effort to seem compassionate and noble. And if anyone dares to question this narrative, that individual or group of people are then pointed out as being wicked and supporting war, etc. Remember, this is also an era where the enemy tried to physically mask people. As a spirit-filled believer, we should not be parroting what the world says, because we should know by now that we've discovered the reality of fake news. Pun intended. As a believer who's led by the Holy Spirit, we cannot be deceived by the spirit of media. We have to be led by the Holy Spirit. In a time of spiritual warfare, we need more than ever the Holy Spirit to discern what's truly happening in the unseen realm. And the Holy Spirit will offer insights that will often be unpopular, controversial, and it will indeed invite persecution. Listen, we have seen the lies. We know who pulls the puppet strings, who's writing the script. But what do they want you to believe now, and why? When I uncovered what's really going on, it broke my heart. It literally broke my heart. I wept when I made this video because I had no idea so much cruelty and evil was going on. And I had to sometimes just stop looking at this, and I found myself grieving for these people. The mainstream media will not show you this. But it's important to see because we need to know the truth and we need to intercede. I hope you have the strength and the courage to watch this entire video.
Але ми тут знаходимося для того, щоб від імені американського народу висловити вам підтримку.
Free world is with you. America is with you. I am with you.
Але вони зрозуміли, що ми не раби, і що за їхні злочини прийшла їхня кара. І зараз тут ми перемогли злочинні окупанти. Слава нації! Господи, славності, славності!
In order to understand what is occurring in Ukraine, there is a critical event in fairly recent history that was the turning point for the nation. Everything changed radically in the year 2014. This was the year of the Maidan Revolution, otherwise known as Euromaidan. This revolution overturned the face of Ukraine's government. It released great violence and unrest, and it only succeeded because of the involvement of the US through the Obama administration and the support of NATO as well. It all began in 2013, and it started with street protests in Kiev. It started with street protests in Kiev by those who stood for EU integration. They were the Euromaidan activists, and at first they were peaceful protests. And in fact, in the beginning, it seemed almost like a music festival. There were charismatic speakers and grand ideas being shared, and large crowds were attracted. They were enjoying the atmosphere as well, the music, the lights, the energy. But almost immediately, you see that these nationalists appeared, and they start chanting slogans against Russian or pro-Russian speakers. And they began chanting Ukraine for Ukrainians, Ukraine above all. And they had the people jumping physically in agreement. And if anyone didn't jump, they would accuse them of being Russian, as though it was such an insult to be Russian. You could not disagree with the Maidan protesters, or you could be in danger. And those who were resistant to ally with Europe were mocked and challenged. So the nationalists were giving speeches, and it came to a point these speeches were laced with poison, a very violent poison. Their goal was to brutally overthrow the president at the time, Yanukovych, who was not agreeing to EU integration. And the neo-Nazi nationalists were really the leaders of the Maidan. But there was more, much more that was going on, because the US was very visible and very heavily supportive of the Maidan. This was during the Obama administration. John McCain spoke publicly on the stage several times, and he was regularly photographed with the leader of the Svobodan nationalists. These were fascists and neo-Nazis, and they were loudly, publicly giving their full support. And the U.S. Secretary of State at the time, Victoria Nuland, was just as, if not more, involved. She, in fact, followed up and traveled to Ukraine 3 times during the revolution to pledge her support in this uprising. And both McCain and Victoria Nuland promised the people, if they overthrew Yanukovych, that the U.S. would back them all the way, that NATO would be with them. I'm not saying anything controversial here. This is all common knowledge. It's information you can easily find online. The U.S. was very public about their support of the activists. Doesn't it seem very strange that the U.S. became the unofficial supervisor of the Maidan Revolution? And the people could see that Maidan was being supported by the U.S., a superpower, and NATO was backing Maidan as well, and the masses were impressed. Let's talk about the neo-Nazi nationalists. The Maidan was driven by nationalists. They were also known as hyper-nationalists or ultra-nationalists or Banderites. Some of them wear the swastika, and they have their neo-Nazi symbols. It's on their flags, it's on their vehicles. The Svobodan nationalists were fully involved in Maidan, and then from that point they formed the Azov Battalion in May 2014. And the Azov Battalion eventually became part of Ukraine's National Guard. So they are part of Ukraine's army in the modern day.
Наші землі, відтворити, відновити і створити нову могутню державу. Слава нації! Смерть ворогам!
Nationalists, they were very voracious in their ambition. They wanted to grow, they wanted to be part of Europe, and there was this new mentality of having freedom. In fact, there was a strong LGBTQ presence at Maidan. It was all about a new era of freedom that was associated with an alliance with Europe and breaking away from tradition. And there were the promises that they could perhaps join NATO one day. So this was the big carrot on a stick that they all were striving for. So the US was fully and publicly involved in driving the Maidan. You can find leaked calls online from Victoria Nuland.
The Klitschko piece is obviously the complicated electron here, especially the announcement of him as deputy prime minister. And you've seen some of my notes on the troubles in the marriage right now. So we're trying to get a read really fast on where he is on this stuff. But I think your argument to him, which you'll need to make, I think that's the next phone call we want to set up, is exactly the one you made to Yachts. And I'm glad you sort of put him on the spot on where he fits in this scenario. And I'm very glad he said what he said in response.
Good. So I don't think Klitsch should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think, what, in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tony Book and his guys. And, you know, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, you know, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week, you know. I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay.
She was actually selecting who she would place in power even before Yanukovych was overthrown. Victoria Nuland, in her own words, was speaking of the formation of a puppet government. I didn't say this. I didn't have to assume this. She says it in her own words. So my question is, every leader who came into power in Ukraine following the Maidan, including Poroshenko and Zelensky, are they then beholden to the US? I'm not saying anything outright because of the fact that this is going on YouTube, but you know the answer.
Завтра підемо разом вперед. Якщо куля в лоб, то куля в лоб.
В мае 2014 года было дикостью предположить, что украинская авиация будет бомбить города.
Залп сделал, изверг.
Антитерористична операція не може і не буде тривати 2-3 місяці.
Говорят, что здесь одни террористы. Какие террористы?
Maidan, a tremendous amount of generous financial support was flooding in. It was coming in for food, for supplies, and this allowed the people to disrupt their lives and just be on the streets for months protesting. Daily food money was given out so people could eat, and they called it sandwich money. It appears, from what I've seen, that their lives were disrupted and completely revolved around these protests. But this could only have occurred if someone was funding it. Let's just say there were many anonymous financial suppliers. I can't say who I who I know was doing this. Let's just say anonymous benefactors appeared to also be making arms and weaponry available to the crowds. So they were benevolently supplying neo-Nazis with weaponry. And because there was already emotions in the protest, it was provoking violence as well. Now, after this coup was successfully orchestrated, the Ukraine government continued to receive generous help and assistance through the years. Since 2014, Ukraine has received over $5.6 billion in aid from the US. In fact, just recently, Biden approved another $200 million in aid to be sent to Ukraine. And as of the 10th of March 2022, US Congress just approved $13.6 billion emergency aid to Ukraine. The Maidan had two very strong objectives: dividing the people against each other. Ukrainians for Ukraine against the Ukrainians who were pro-Russian. They wanted to be allies with Russia. The other objective in the Maidan was to vilify Russia aggressively. One of the first things that the new government did when they overthrew Yanukovych and came into power, they got rid of the status of the Russian language. And it came to be that those who spoke Russian and were pro-Russian would be viewed as terrorists, separatists. And one of the major tactics of the Nationalists was mind programming. Youths were targeted. The Azov battalion began training youths and children in summer camps. And these camps are run by Nationalists, exposing tender little children to mind programming, bloodthirsty chants, a hatred for Russians.
Рій наше гасло. України діти ми.
Нехай Москва лежить в руїнах, а нам на це не чхати. Смерть, смерть москалям! Смерть, смерть москалям!
Yes, sir.
So I'm looking through the documentary you shot for us in Ukraine. Basically, I just wanted to ask if you could take me through a few things. We're looking at these kids at camp, right? Like singing around a campfire?
This is a summer camp for children run by a military battalion on the outskirts of Kiev. Summer camps in Ukraine are common, but this one is much more extreme. The kids spend a week on the camp. They learn patriotic songs, they receive firearms combat training, and they participate in combat reconstructions. The children that you're seeing in this edit, half of them have a direct relationship to a battalion called Azov.
So who is Azov?
Azov are a controversial Ukrainian battalion. After Crimea's annexation, the official Ukrainian military didn't have enough soldiers to fight, so civilians formed many of their own volunteer battalions, one of which was Azov. Soon after, in November 2014, Azov were brought into the official National Guard. So now they're a legitimate battalion.
В дитинстві взагалі не маю уявлення, що таке війна, мабуть, і не задумуєшся.
Це зараз, то дітям треба казати, що в нас війна, щоб вони розуміли.
Моє рішення. Я цілий рік хотів цей табір. І мої мрії здійснилися.
He's incredible, Smolny. His memory of patriotic literature and poems was incredible. The kids live in tents and sometimes they're woken up at 3 a.m. by fireworks or like smoke grenades, you know, and they have to get out of their tents and simulate combat. But if you ask any of them, they enjoy it.
These guys saw action, right? Who were they actually fighting against in that like archive footage?
They are fighting Russian sympathizers. It's not Russian army, it's Russian rebels, I suppose, or perhaps even Ukrainian-born Russian sympathizers.
Я не лівих взглядів, я не комуніст. Я не нацист, не фашист. Я націоналіст своєї країни.
I wanted to pick up on the nationalism thing. What do they identify as being a nationalist of Ukraine?
Number one is not to be Russian, because for the last 100 years, Russia have been oppressing and pushing at their borders. And number two is to hold on to whatever Ukrainian identity they did have and still do have. So they're sitting between Russia and Russia's ideologies, but also not wanting to join a liberalizing Western Europe. They don't like immigration, they don't like foreigners.
The fear that they're feeling, does that link to nationalism somehow?
Historically, how their nationalism relates to fear. It's fear of their language being squashed by Russia. It's fear of their land being taken away by Russia.
Is there an argument to be made that these camps kind of are stoking the fear?
You know, you can even find Ukrainian Christians who've been deceived by these nationalists. They believe they are heroes and patriots. And I have come across such people. The mind programming goes so deep.
Это официально, так сказать, размещено на сайте. Чтобы создать действительную украинскую Украину, физически ликвидировать всю русскоязычную интеллигенцию и всех украинофобов быстро, без суда и следствия, расстрелять. Реестр украинофобов на своем участке может составить любой член «Свободы», казнить всех членов антиукраинских партий и организаций, не только пророссийских, но и прорумынских, провенгерских, протатарских. Проклятое жидовское сообщество не обращает на это внимания. Это сионистское сообщество и стремится к тому, чтобы украинцы исчезли навсегда. Русскоязычная аморфная биомасса живых желудков – это стадо надо ликвидировать где-то на 5-6 миллионов особей. А в это время идет огромная работа по воздействию на психику детей, маленьких детей, чтобы вырастить целое поколение ненавидящих Россию украинцев. Посмотрите, это выпуски 2016 и 2020 годов.
Якщо хтось з вас Марічка, нема тут Марічок, правда? Але, можливо, ваша товаришка називається Марічка, то ніколи не кличте Марічку Машою. Бо якщо вона Маша, то це форма не наша. Нехай вона їде туди, де ті Маші живуть. Якщо разом хтось Петрика обізвав Петію, це також не український хлопчик. Він мав би звідси забратися або навчитися, як українською мовою правильно називатися.
Мариночка, ти будеш різати русню?
Да.
Що ти будеш робити?
Русню резать! Я буду резать русню! Я буду резать русню.
Мы потеряли Украину не потому, что Украина захотела свободы, потому что мы своими амбициями, ощущением того, что будет все как было, какой-то куда они денутся хохлы? О чем разговор? Есть газ, есть... А там работали. Работали каждый божий день с детьми. И вырастили 2 поколения, которые никогда не повернутся к России, если не будет катастрофы, катаклизма, крови и так далее, и так далее. Обратите внимание на то, когда мы об этом говорили. Можно было представить себе, чтобы кто-нибудь на улицах Москвы или другого русского города, тем более ребенок, пинал бы украинский флаг? А как бы на это среагировал толерантный мир, если бы это делали мы? А когда это делали не мы, он как-то среагировал? Нет, никак. Мир проспал или не хотел видеть, что возрождается неофашизм в середине Европы.
Let's pay attention to what these young girls are chanting. They look like sweet, adorable teenagers. You could never guess what they're chanting.
Слава Україні! Слава нації! Україна понад усе!
Слава Україні! Героям слава! Слава нації! Смерть ворогам! Україна понад усе!
Революція! Революція! Слава нації! Смерть ворогам! Нація! Батьківщина! Це Україна! Куди міняють?
Ну що, москалику, поговоримо? Слава Україні! Героям слава! Слава нації! Смерть москалям!
Слава нації! Смерть ворогам! Україна! Понад усе! Україна! Понад усе! Україна! Понад усе! Це братні, злотні дрижі! Слава! Слава! Слава!
Новые фашисты растут.
Новые фашисты! Новые фашисты!
In the translation of their words, we hear lethal curses declaring death for the Russians. It's absolutely mind-boggling. It's unbelievable. To sow into this ministry, you can use PayPal, ZELLE, or even VENMO. Info is in the description box. Thank you so much for supporting this work. God bless you.